Hi and welcome everybody, those of you who've joined us so far. So we'll get kicked off. We've got quite a lot to go through today. So welcome everybody to the launch of our Future Talent Insights report for 2020. So our report is produced in two parts, but we've joined that together today for today's webinar. We'll be talking through kind of top level highlights, and more information will be available in the report, which you'll be able to obtain a copy of following today's session. So we'll aim to have time for questions at the end, but if we do run short, then we're absolutely happy to speak with you further on a one-to-one basis. So let's get started with some introductions. So to introduce myself, my name is Carlin Summers. I'm a client solutions consultant. I've been working with Amberjack for almost 4 years now. I started with Amberjack as a client partner and supported our clients with the day-to-day delivery of their campaigns before moving across the consulting solutions team. So I work closely with organisations to understand where their challenges lie, and also I bring together subject matter experts within Amberjack to put together solutions that address not only today's challenges, but are also aligned with future strategic goals. So we're also really delighted today to be joined by Tristram Hooley from the Institute of Student Employers. So Tristram, if you could just introduce yourself and your part in today's webinar.
Yeah, so I'm Tristram Hooley. I'm Chief Research Officer at the Institute of Student Employers, which is an employer association focusing on entry-level and early career talent. And I'll just be really listening to a lot of the data that's being presented here by Amberjack today, and then adding in a few insights from some of the research that we've done that I think is really complementary to some of the work that Amberjack have been doing.
Perfect, thank you very much. So as I mentioned, we will try and leave questions for the end, certainly as we go through, but feel free to ask them as we're going through, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So just moving on, we've got quite a bit to get through today, but I just wanted to briefly introduce Amberjack. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we've been specialising in early talent and volume recruitment for more than 20 years now. We offer a range of services that cover the full end-to-end life cycle of a campaign. We're really passionate about creating the most engaging candidate experiences, but also maintaining that support for you with those drivers which normally come from time and cost efficiencies. So if you do have any questions or anything you want to discuss following today's webinar, then absolutely please do get in contact with us. So without further ado, let's take a look at part one. So part one today is going to be focusing on the information gathered across tens of thousands of lines of candidate data, and we'll look at university league tables, media sources, and some equal opportunities data. So we'll start off with universities. We'll look at application to hires in terms of ratios. We have seen application to hires really drop. We've seen our lowest overall average since our insights report began. There are overall reductions in application rates, which we think can be attributed in some cases to improving efficiency. So some industries have done really well in terms of kind of how they're attracting candidates and being a lot more targeted. But what we have seen though is where some other industries tends to be in kind of the digital and IT and technology sectors, the challenges can be seen where there is a lack of supply. So low application ratios aren't necessarily always the best, but in general, it is a good thing to see that we're seeing potentially more efficient processes coming into the market now. Sales and marketing have also seen a huge increase in ratio, so they're sort of bucking that trend. They're currently sitting at about 151 applications per hire. So we think that certainly both scenarios would suggest that perhaps a relook at attraction strategies could potentially change and address both of those challenges. Clearly with the sales and marketing, it's a huge amount of applications to have received for each hire, and that can pose its own challenges. Whilst you think sometimes it's great to have lots of applications, but actually that can provide some real inefficiencies in terms of the amount of time it takes to process those candidates through to find the right ones. So moving on to kind of the university league tables. In terms of the league tables we've seen, there's not a lot that's changed since our report last year. So Russell Group universities continue to dominate. They've got they take up 21 of the top the top 30 places in the table. Just as a reminder, there's 24 Russell Group universities in total, so only 3 have not made this initial list. This list is concentrating on the application rates. So you can see there at the very top, we've got the University of Warwick, and in fact the top 6 have remained the same, certainly since last year. But it's Warwick and UCL basically have kind of swapped places. So there's not really a lot of change that we've seen from that side of things. The top non-Russell Group university was Aston, and that came in at 12th position. So still really dominated, certainly in the top 10 in terms of volumes of applications coming through from those Russell Group universities. Moving on to looking at the actual offers received. So it's great to get lots of applications, but what does that mean in terms of offers? So Warwick's high application volumes have translated into a high percentage of offers. The only non-Russell Group university to make the top 10 was Bath, which came in at number 9. We saw Russell Group universities having a slight decrease. So last year there was around 85% of the top 30. But actually what really caught our interest this year was that there were 6 universities that were European universities that made it into our long list. And the University of Warsaw School of Economics ranked at number 37. So that suggests to us that there's a concerted effort by some employers to be certainly looking a little bit further afield than just UK universities. So our question is, will the trend continue with Britain's exit from the EU? And of course, as we all know, the restricted movement due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it'll be really interesting to see, I think, what happens with that kind of for the coming season. So when we take into consideration applications and also hires, what we do is we calculate the conversion ratio, because it's great to get lots of applications. Fundamentally, what we tend to see is higher application numbers translate into higher hiring numbers, but what does it mean from an application to hire ratio? So we always consider this area to be a key measure when looking to plan an efficient campaign. This year we saw 13 new entrants, so 6 of which have actually taken out the top spots. Non-Russell Group universities make up 60% of the top 10, with Aberystwyth leading the charge at number 1, which is really great to see, actually. So for us, that really goes to show that the organisations that are moving away from the traditional Russell Group universities are able to see some really good conversions in terms of the time and the effort that's spent with those universities. So what we found again was really interesting, that Warsaw School of Economics and Polytechnic came in at 5th and 15th place respectively, so showing some really respectable conversion rates there. What we did see was the biggest drops this year were Cambridge, which dropped down 19 places. Southampton and Exeter both fell 18 places. And really surprisingly, actually, Oxford, which is normally a pretty decent performer, has actually dropped out of the top 30 list altogether. So just moving on to look at media sources. We take a look at kind of all media sources. We know that online sources absolutely continue to dominate in terms of applications, but what we have seen really this year is a drop in how much or how many applications are coming through those traditional online sources. So last year we reported about 65% coming from online sources. This year it's dropped down to just under 43%. The percentage of hires from online sources also saw a significant drop. So that dropped down from 54% last year, coming in at just over 26% this year. So when looking at conversion ratios, actually, although you do tend to still get those volumes coming through from your online sources, we found the conversion ratios were better with work experience, internships and placements. So just kind of highlighting the kind of real value that those sorts of programs give. But also, so they came out on top with just over 16 to 1 application to hire ratio, followed closely by friends and family, and then also careers, fairs and events at 22 and 24 to 1 respectively. So the data suggests that creating an efficient campaign with sensible application numbers and decent hiring numbers can be achieved by means other than traditional online media. Looking at the data with a new lens, however, of the coronavirus pandemic and what that means for attraction, there's still plenty that can be done without relying too heavily on advertising online. So many organisations are still continuing to deliver or to carry on placements and deliver them virtually, which is really great to see. Virtual events can certainly be run in place of careers fairs using online engagement tools such as kind of candidate chat tools. We have one called Amberjack. They can provide you with alternative and possibly a more focused approach to candidates as well. So often virtual events can provide businesses with significant reductions in cost as well as resource required. So we know that that's certainly a significant challenge for many people that we've been speaking to recently. I will mention as well the information that we gathered, and I forgot to mention this at the start. So everything that we've gathered in terms of the data is kind of pre-COVID-19. So we are kind of looking at that, but also taking it a look at it through a lens of kind of what we've seen and the effects that we'll potentially see moving forward as well. So we wanted to take a look as well at equal opportunities. I know that this has been a huge area of focus for literally every organisation that we speak to in various forms. People have differing agendas in different areas. But what we have seen is some really, really encouraging results this year. So we're encouraged by the stats, particularly around the gender equality, although it's only a slight increase from last year for females. So last year it was sitting at kind of 36%. Seeing any increase in female applications is certainly a step forward in the right direction. So we've also seen the rate of those choosing other, which is really great. So they're not identifying as either female or male. That number has doubled since last year. So that's really encouraging. It leads us to believe that more people are feeling confident to be able to identify as something other than the traditional male or female, but also not choosing the kind of the prefer not to state. Most notable in our data this year, though, is certainly the conversion ratios. So whilst male applications and offers are still higher overall, in terms of conversions, females fared much better with a ratio of just over 33 to 1, compared with almost 40 to 1 for males. So for those who are focusing on gender, then there's absolutely some good news there, and we can certainly see the benefits of those who are kind of concentrating and trying to improve the balance in their organisations. So we'll move on to disability. A little bit of a different story here. So whilst gender equality has improved, we were a little bit disappointed with this year's data on disability. So we actually saw a drop in applications from 3.2% last year down to 2.97%. That then further drops down to just 2.55% of hires. So on a positive note though, the conversion ratios have actually improved. The conversion ratio last year was 44 applications to every hire, which has actually improved to 41 to 1 this year. So a little bit of good news there. It does highlight the message that employers do continue to struggle to make the most of opportunities that are provided by what we know to be a really underutilised population of candidates. So we'll move on through to ethnicity. So we've seen a real drive in this area of diversity, and it absolutely looks to be kind of bearing the fruits of all of that work. So this year, applications from white British candidates actually dropped to just over 37%, and that's down from 45.5% last year. And then the hires actually we saw even more of a drop. So last year was sitting at about 65% of hires, and that's dropped down to 44.5% of hires this year. Having said that, we know that these are still out of proportion when looking at kind of the representative working market. It's really encouraging when we're looking at kind of the broad picture. BAME hires have jumped from 24% last year all the way up to 40.42, or just over 40% this year. But our big story for this year is really significant improvement for Black candidates, with the highest percentage of applications we've seen for this group, and that's sitting at nearly 9%. So we've seen also a huge improvement in application to hire ratio for that particular group. So whilst there's absolutely no doubt more work that needs to be done, we're really, really encouraged and hope to see this trend improve. So just sort of moving on to social mobility. So it's just important to note, certainly with social mobility, this is only the second year that we've reported on social mobility. We absolutely continue to push what we believe to be a really vital agenda with our clients across industries. And again, it's worthwhile noting that the sample size is still relatively smaller than what we see for some of the other diversity groups. There's still some challenges that we see with obtaining or identifying socially mobile candidates. So really defining what to record in relation to social mobility, and certainly some reluctance amongst candidates, amongst the candidate population, to complete this data. We think it's temporary. Certainly in the last 10 years, the number of people selecting prefer not to state on diversity questionnaires has actually plummeted. So we're expecting to hopefully see the same with social mobility questions in the future. And that will certainly come with more people understanding sort of the reasons why these sorts of questions are being asked. So just looking at the data, this year, the percentage of applications from people with at least one social mobility flag against their application increased from 20 or just over 20% last year to sort of just under 27% this year. So that's quite a significant improvement. What we haven't seen, however, is an improvement in terms of kind of the hires. Things have sort of slipped back a little bit, which is a little bit discouraging, and the conversion ratio for advantaged candidates has actually improved against a worsening ratio for disadvantaged candidates. So again, the sample size isn't huge on this, but we're absolutely keen for this to become a core part of our annual insights report. So absolutely anything that we can do to kind of drive that agenda forward, we are absolutely happy to support. So that there ends kind of part one of our session today. I'll move on to part two. So part one was really a lot about data. Part two is again using data and survey information from across our client base, and surveying our future talent clients. We aim to share sort of insights into most efficient, engaging and effective assessment practices. So we'll talk about current trends, what we've seen organisations do, but we'll also look at what the future of assessment can look like. So we've got some information there around kind of leading assessment solutions, and certainly highlight how they can benefit you. As things continue to unfold and change, certainly on a daily basis, what's becoming clearer is that whilst current measures may be relaxed or even lifted, the likelihood of further outbreaks and therefore reinstatement of restrictions remains high. So in this section, we'll also talk through ways in which you can utilise the power of technology, certainly without compromising your candidate experience. So I mentioned the kind of the effective, efficient and engaging sort of elements to assessment. So absolutely, when it comes to our assessment processes, we know that our clients expect an excellent return when they invest in future talent. So we achieve those results really by designing selection solutions that are categorized and that tick all those three boxes for varying different reasons. So we wanted to take you first through kind of a little bit of an overview of what assessment processes or how they've changed, certainly since last year. We're looking at these under the kind of the lens of efficiencies. So what we've seen certainly since last year, if the average number of stages that a candidate goes through is reducing. In our last report, there was an average of 5 stages, and in previous reports, it's been as much as 7. So what we think is certainly time and cost efficiencies have been a real driving force behind some of these changes, but we also need to highlight the effect that this has on the candidate population. So few stages or fewer stages require less investment of time from candidates, which can improve their overall experience. It does, however, mean that you have fewer opportunities to wow your candidates, and so there needs to be plenty of thought put into each stage. A reduction in the number of stages can also provide you as an organisation with a competitive advantage, as you can be quicker to offer the best talent in the market. Organisations are now also leveraging valid assessments that are quicker for candidates. So they not only reduce time and therefore costs, they also can provide much richer data for your recruiters than what traditional methods have been able to achieve in the past. It's also really apparent in the current crisis that digital assessments are not just a nice to have anymore, they're absolutely a vital tool in today's recruitment world. So let's take a look at some of the stages in more detail and what you can be doing to incorporate some of the tools. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with situational judgment tests. So the introduction of situational judgment tests reduces the volume of candidates in your pipeline and can do so by sort of 30 to 50%. It's a highly efficient sifting tool because the scoring is automated. The use of SJTs means you can introduce a shorter application form, which means that the candidates benefit from the reduction in time spent and also reduces the business's hours spending reviewing it. So SJTs also allow candidates to be automatically sifted out. So, from a time spent side of it, that effectively takes 0 business hours. So no requirement of resource from your teams. It also allows candidates to move through the process faster. Candidates can complete a typical SJT in around 20 to 30 minutes. Compared with what a traditional application form might include, which can take sort of up to 2 to 3 hours for a candidate. So after the first screening stages, for example, your essential criteria, which can be automated through some systems, and doing an automated SJT, we know that certainly medium and large future talent employers are still investing business hours in manually selecting candidates at the application and video interview stage. We're always looking at how to kind of bring greater efficiencies to our clients. So we're currently in the process of developing a new, more powerful online assessment, which we're actually going to be launching next week. So that's going to be on the 7th. It really combines effectively applied cognitive ability and SJT assessments, and we kind of call it our blended assessment. So you can see there that certainly the screening capability sits really a lot higher than what sort of some of those traditional tests have been. We expect to see a screen out capability of around 50%, and that would be without any adverse impact. And then we also estimate a further kind of 50 to 60% sift out after screening of the self-reflection element of the blended assessment. So the efficiencies are obvious, certainly when we contrast these with some of the alternatives that are available. So at the start of the process there, you've kind of got your SJT or that element of it. We certainly don't think that video interviews are going to be, I guess, phased out anytime soon. We know certainly that video interviews have their benefits. We know that there's no inefficiencies from no-shows. They take less time when compared to telephone interviews. We also know that video interviews are typically more effectively anchored in objective scoring criteria, which actually can make them more predictively effective than telephone interviews. And that happens by reducing some elements of unconscious bias. You can also, I guess, improve your video interviews by including introductory, farewell, and hints and tips videos. And they're absolutely present in some of the most successful versions that we've seen. We have actually seen some people go as far as including sort of blooper reels in their video assessments. So it kind of helps to really relax those candidates before taking those assessments. And we know that certainly the best video interviews don't use platforms, don't use the technology to deliver a like-for-like replacement of a telephone or face-to-face interview. Instead, they certainly exploit the unique characteristics of the platform. So showing videos that tell stories and introducing case content, and that allows a collection of certainly primary evidence rather than self-support evidence. And also helping candidates gain an insight that drives self-reflection. I mentioned earlier, certainly with the reduction in numbers of stages that candidates will go through, these opportunities are where you have to really kind of get those candidates invested in the organisation and really get their buy-in. So anything that you can do to enhance their video experience is certainly advised. So we move on to kind of the assessment centre stage. So it's the final stage in the process, and certainly has been the case for probably around the last 5 decades. So when delivered well, they can absolutely improve the predictive effectiveness of hiring manager decisions by assessing candidate behaviours and capabilities and certainly motivations in multiple ways and across multiple assessors, and that absolutely helps reduce the bias. Assessment centres haven't really changed much over the decades, but what we've seen certainly more recently in the last couple of years, and it is absolutely gaining momentum, is the leveraging of technology at this stage. So certainly driven by a desire to introduce time and cost efficiencies. You know, as an example, we've seen savings of up to 96% of admin time with organisations using our digital assessment platform. The digital delivery of assessments means that you can use things like fewer facilitators. Candidates can receive a more immersive experience when completing assessments, certainly on laptops and tablets, and it gives them a better insight into life at your organisation. So technology has absolutely been ever more present in recent times, certainly following the COVID-19 pandemic. What we've seen then is a necessity to host assessment centres virtually. But what that means, I guess, post COVID-19 is the ability to be able to maximise efficiencies. So Impact, which is our virtual assessment centre tool, can be used certainly on that virtual basis. It can be integrated alongside sort of web-based communication platforms such as Skype, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, kind of any platform that you're wanting to use from that side of things. And it can certainly reduce the impact of unconscious bias. Assessors can only see the scores that they've given to a candidate, and it means that you can also significantly reduce the number of assessors that you need. As an example, group exercises can be recorded, which means presenters don't have to be live online. They can go back and review those after the fact. They can also assess multiple candidates as well, because candidates effectively on sort of the sharing sites, they can only kind of talk one person at a time, which means that assessors can also go back and review those candidates on an individual basis as well. So you might have one assessor to 4 candidates rather than 1 to 2, for example. So we want to talk a little bit about kind of the concept of sprint recruitment as well. So sprint recruitment is I guess a more, I guess, as the name states, a quicker way of getting our candidates through. So we've seen certainly through our insights research that more employers are adopting this sprint approach to their future talent recruitment. So it means opening to receive applications for really a short period of time. It involves a little bit more of a load in terms of the upfront advertising and attraction, but what it does is ensures that the best talent who are committed to working for your organisation kind of complete their application. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been or seen where you create a deadline and candidates won't apply until kind of 11:59, so kind of having that short window we have seen tends to encourage candidates to kind of get their applications in quickly. So following the application stage, what happens is they get quickly processed through the remaining stages. So where you've got the technology to support those types of stages, i.e. the SJTs and those video interviews, the candidates can be asked to attend assessment centres in relatively short time. So the fast-paced approach really keeps candidates engaged throughout the process, and also ensures you're getting the best out of your resources, and sort of managing the team effectively. So we have seen adopting sprint approaches reduce time to hire to as little as kind of 4 weeks, and that also reduces the chance of candidates accepting an offer from a competitor. So we do have a large telecommunications client that we work with who actually managed to reduce their average time to offer by 59%, down from 84 days to just 35. So that's shown some real improvements in terms of adopting that efficient approach when looking at kind of this sprint approach. We do have some tips and actions there to really consider if you are looking at introducing this type of recruitment. So looking at the current number of stages in your selection process, what's your time to hire? So really understanding, being able to get that data is important. Fundamentally understanding how many business hours are spent managing your candidate volumes, how that translates into your cost per hire, what expertise and technology do you need to make the process more efficient, and could your current process be delivered virtually? So that could be all the way from end to end, as we've just mentioned about the delivery of virtual assessment centres. So we would absolutely be happy to talk through any of those areas with you following on from today's session if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that area of recruitment. So we've spoken about efficiencies in assessment processes. What is also fundamentally important is making sure that the process is engaging for candidates. So an engaging activity attracts your full attention, and when doing it, you feel committed and immersed. So when candidates enjoy that application journey, it really gives them a great first impression of your company, and this really motivates them to kind of submit their application. So an engaging selection process can give you the edge over a competitor who's also working to recruit the best talent. I know there are absolutely similar talent pools that people are needing to draw from. And what we'll see certainly in the future, I think, with COVID-19 and the effects of that coming through, what we anticipate seeing is a lot more candidates applying to multiple roles. So making sure that that you're able to kind of engage those candidates the best will give you the best opportunity to secure them. So through our survey, we found that 47% of employers see a high withdrawal rate when initial stages and application stages are traditional and not as engaging. So those sorts of stages include things like long application forms and sort of traditional cognitive ability tests. Our experience and research absolutely show that an engaging journey that provides a realistic preview of the role works to set out clear expectations, and candidates end up being more committed to their program. So one of the ways in which you can measure the engagement of a candidate is through Net Promoter Scoring. So it's a measure of candidate satisfaction within the application process. There's different variables that influence an NPS score, things like the speed and the quality of the candidate communications. But we found a key variable is the type of assessments that candidates are required to sit is consistent. So the presence of some assessments over others can help to produce a different NPS score. So we see here that the traditional cognitive ability testing sort of tends to sit at around 20 to 30. Just as a reminder as well, on the NPS score rating scale, it's rated from anywhere from a minus 100 to a positive 100. So anything above a 0 can be considered to be not a negative experience. Anything up to 30 is considered kind of good. 30 to 50%, 30 to 50 as a score is considered excellent, with anything above could be considered absolutely outstanding. So we can see there that your traditional cognitive ability tests do sit around that kind of 20 to 30 range. Video interviews are around 30 to 50, but where you're able to create those situational judgment tests and those immersive assessments, that tends to improve your NPS score, therefore your candidate experience and engagement scores at the start of your process. So we mentioned there sort of the immersive assessments. We know that immersive assessments tend to drive engagement. We've noticed that the NPS score improves when assessments such as video interviews, SJTs, and assessment centres are made more immersive. So as an example, we found that when candidates experience a work typical challenge and when they're encouraged to act naturally, we can assess their true behaviours and abilities. So if the assessment has one or more of these immersive features in them, then the experience surrounds the candidate. Candidates are also really encouraged to behave naturally and be themselves, which we've observed drives up their engagement. So again, one of our clients, a large telecommunications client, turned their text-based SJT into an immersive video-based one. They saw their NPS scores increase by 10%. Another example is a video interview where candidates effectively recorded their answer to text questions, and they're now being asked by graduates and managers that the candidates are likely to meet. And more recently, we filmed work scenarios, which is proven to be the most engaging and dynamic video interview option. So not just getting somebody to ask a question that you might have translated from text, but also recording some scenarios can really help with that engagement from candidates and help with that immersive side of things. So assessment centres have also that have adopted immersive features have seen a rise in candidate engagement scores. So at the immersive assessment centres, when we design them, we tend to give candidates their schedule and their information for the day, and then we empower them to manage their own time. So that's one of the fundamental features when we're looking at using impact. So either whether it's in person on a paperless perspective or either being delivered virtually, fundamentally the candidates are given the materials and allow them to kind of manage themselves. So using sort of the impact tool, candidates can view their calendar on the day, and that can be either via PCs if it's going to be virtually, or potentially through tablets, or even on their own phones. They can access materials and different exercises, receive emails, and certainly much more. But certainly that digital element goes a long way to helping support with that immersive element to your assessments. So we've spoken quite a bit about creating digital platforms or using digital assessment platforms and tools, and making sure that the sort of technology is at the forefront of what you do. But it's really, really important as well that we balance technology with a human touch. So incorporating certain things like personalized feedback, coaching calls, candidate chat platforms, and certainly development forums and workshops. Those sorts of things really, really bring those candidates back to having that personalized feeling when they're going through a process. You can see there that we've seen some scores for NPS range between 50 and 100%, 100 points, sorry, for those social forums and those coaching calls. So rather than being just a call prior to an assessment centre where you ask a candidate if they're still going to arrive on the day and do they have the address and is everything all right, do you have any questions, it's really about kind of taking them through the assessment centre, maybe putting their mind at ease. Do they know what to expect on the day? Really, really setting those candidates up for success and helping them understand that you're really trying to set them up to be able to show their best selves rather than try and kind of test them and trick them. I mentioned there as well, things like a candidate chat platform. So that can allow candidates to join sort of an online social forum. It can help candidates to feel a bit more prepared and relaxed ahead of attending any of the stages. So it might be the video interview stage, it might be the assessment centre, but certainly the human touch can be integrated into processes that gives candidates something that's just for their benefit. What you can do is we talk about giving candidates a gift. So it doesn't necessarily mean as what we would typically call it a gift, like as a present or something like that. It can take lots of different forms. It's got no agenda. It's not an assess aspect of the process. So that's sort of what these social forums are around. There, it's effectively sort of a gift to the candidate where they can understand more about the role. They can understand more about potentially themselves and other people as part of the process, where they don't feel that they're being scrutinised in terms of what they're saying. We certainly know that progressive companies are also hosting facilitated development forums and workshops. Absolutely, one of our clients has built in what they call a purpose hub. So that's actually at their assessment centre. It's a voluntary place where candidates can visit multiple times to reflect on how they're doing at the assessment centre, and they can use sort of the takeaway reflection guide. They can receive coaching, they can watch videos or read articles. So it's really a kind of a safe space for them to be at that assessment centre that they know isn't being assessed. So it provides a really good opportunity for candidates to develop their self-awareness and be a little bit clearer on their purpose as well. So we also talk about kind of the technology supporting businesses from a sustainability perspective. So we know that leaders of the future expect employers to embrace sustainable values. So where candidates are far more socially aware than what they potentially have been in previous generations, we've observed that the sustainable processes are more engaging to your target market, which in this instance is certainly future talent. So according to Unidays, the Student Research and Insight Survey, 93% of Gen Zers believe that brands have an obligation to take a stand on environmental issues. And also almost 1/3 of Gen Zers have boycotted a company they perceive as following unsustainable practices. So it's really, really vital that, that anything that you can do to kind of help support in those sorts of agendas to bring those candidates on board is great to sort of shout about. So there's lots of different ways you can increase the sustainability in your selection processes. So you can look to design assessments around relevant business challenges that also get candidates thinking and talking about social environmental factors that are involved. Running paperless assessment centres, it's a really, really huge thing. If you think about, I'm sure I don't have to tell you about all the reams of paper that normally have to get printed off. Even for organisations that aren't assessing hundreds of candidates, even if it's just 1 or 2 assessment centres, there's still a significant amount of printing off of candidate packs and assessor packs. As soon as a candidate potentially pulls out or an assessor doesn't show up on the day, there's the reprinting of things that has to kind of go on as well. So using digital briefs as well, so giving candidates some pre-work prior to the assessment centres is another really good way of kind of helping to support that digital and sustainability agenda. So whatever your sustainable practices are, the future talent space and candidates like hearing about it. So make sure that you share these practices and kind of the reasons behind why you're doing it throughout your process. Don't be afraid to kind of shout out about it. So again, looking at some of the things to consider. So really, really thinking about making sure your process, or consider if your processes are engaging. Do they stand out from the competition? And if not, how can you get them to do that? What are your candidates saying about their application experience? Do you need smart measuring engagement? So do you currently survey or gauge candidate engagement by a survey at the end of a process? If you're not getting those scores kind of as the candidates go through that process, is it a true reflection of that experience, or could it be tainted by potentially their experience of maybe not getting a job or maybe getting a job? So really thinking about those measurements of candidate engagement is important. looking at your assessment centre. So is it immersive? Does it really represent the role, the programme and the culture of your organisation? And does your process have the right balance of technology and the human touch? So just moving on very quickly, what we wanted to do as well was talk about the effectiveness of your processes. So it's really important an effective assessment process is one that's valid, reliable and fair. So using valid methods of assessment means measuring the knowledge, skills and behaviours that matter in the role of the Future Talent programme. So valid assessments help you find the right and the best candidates. However, in this section, we'll explain a little bit that the most valid assessments are not always the fairest or the most inclusive. So we'll share a few tips on how you can achieve a balance of validity and fairness in your process. So when we talk about validity, we talk about predictive validity, which refers to how well an assessment predicts future performance. But we also champion another type of validity, which is called face validity. So face validity means that on the face of it, the assessment appears to be effective and relevant, and face valid assessments reflect the role and the work environment. So ideally, an assessment has both predictive and face validity. So you've got an example there of candidates who or what we see with regards to traditional methods. So versus what can be introduced in terms of modern methods. So traditionally, you might have an application form or a CV screen. And what you can introduce is an immersive situational judgment test or kind of a blended assessment. So that creates not only that predictive validity element, but also because it's immersive, candidates can relate the assessment back to their job role. So it creates that face validity side of things. That comes in also with your cognitive ability test, so those can kind of be swapped out. Your telephone interview, moving across to a video interview, can also, as we mentioned earlier, creating those videos of the scenes that the candidates might expect to see at work can help improve that face validity side of things. And also, just a move and an update from the traditional assessment centres through to creating kind of immersive and virtual assessment centres can really kind of help support with that validity side of things as well. So we wanted to take a look at kind of what the future world of work looks like. It's absolutely rapidly changing at the moment, and this has been accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis. It requires us to adapt to the way that we collaborate and get tasks done, which at the moment are certainly virtually. Digitalization and technology will absolutely continue to evolve alongside other elements of the working environment. So we need to make sure that we're assessing for qualities that help us see which candidates have the potential to adapt to changing circumstances and perform in the future. And we can do that by leveraging technology. We absolutely believe in emphasising the assessment of a candidate's future potential, certainly over their past performance or traditional competencies. And we've created a high potential model that focuses on measuring competencies that will be needed in the future world of work. So the model works to identify candidates who have high potential to thrive in the working environment. And that's not just for today, but that's also in the future. So the high potential, which we call HYPO, the model is built on 4 pillars. So we look at applied intellect, digital mindset, creative force, and grit. So it's all based on psychological and social science research, which we're confident that candidates with these qualities have the potential to be highly effective in the future. And candidates with these qualities, we believe, will be the best suited to be able to adapt, certainly drive creativity, leverage technology, and get the job done and be the best leaders of tomorrow. So just sort of looking at that high potential assessment. So in a world where further uncertainty really is the only certainty, all that matters is kind of looking at what a candidate's potential is. I mentioned earlier about our new blended assessment that we're launching in September. It is based on our high potential model and will be focusing on identifying high potential. So the test outputs will be used for sifting decisions, but the narrative reporting output will be developmental in nature. So you kind of get both elements involved in that. So certainly in line with our ethos of creating engaging assessments, we wanted to bring the test to life and present them in a realistic and engaging way. For example, presenting questions as realistic emails and reports. We've created this blended assessment that virtually immerses the candidate in a day in the life of a typical candidate, and allows employees to look at the whole person and their potential kind of in one sitting. So the test includes applied intellect, behavioural questions, and we've built in a self-reflection element to assess learning agility. We certainly know that this is an important aspect for professional development in any future talent role. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll be holding our launch webinar next Thursday, so that's the 7th of May. We'd absolutely love to see you there, but do get in touch in the meantime if you'd like to know any more about it. So we've talked a lot today about the data from our survey, and that was so much uncertainty. Effectively, what is certain is that the use of technology in recruitment is no longer something to consider, but it's fundamental in being able to carry on. It's certain too that seeking to identify a candidate's potential rather than relying on past experience can ensure you select the right candidate that will make valuable contributions, not just in the immediate future, but certainly on the long-term basis. So with that in mind, I'd like to actually hand over now to Tristram, who's going to talk about some of the research that the ISE have carried out recently. So over to you, Tristram.
So just very briefly, I'll just run through a few insights that we've got from our research. I think you'll find that a lot of the evidence that Amberjack have presented so far really aligns with our research. We're generally doing surveys which are probably, I guess, broader, but perhaps not as deep. So we're trying to kind of get a better insight about the sort of whole of the graduate labour market, but probably aren't drilling into quite as much depth in some of the process issues that we've just been hearing about. We produce a number of different pieces of research. So the first one that I'd talk about is our recruitment survey, which is an annual survey that we do. In 2019, we found that the early career market, so both graduates and non-graduates, we're interested in apprentices as well, was growing, that firms were reporting some difficulty in finding certain roles. And then we also drilled a little bit further into pay. And so what was the average annual salary? And we then break that down by sector and so on. So this gives you an insight into some of the kinds of things that we're finding. So essentially that kind of, that research is really looking at the process of recruitment and attraction. If we go on to the next slide, we then can see another big piece of work that we do, which is on development. And so this, so if the recruitment and selection one looks at how do employers generally treat hires before they actually join a company, the development survey looks at how do they treat them in the kind of immediate aftermath. And so what we found there, for example, was that the typical firm is spending around almost £6,000 on developing entry-level talent. So this is big business, and this is something that people are investing in. We also found that firms recognise and value the skills of new hires, but they also identify a number of weaknesses, and we drill into those weaknesses in a range of different ways in the survey. And that we also find that this new entry-level talent tends to be pretty loyal. So over half of graduates and coming on almost around about 2/3 of non-graduates staying for at least 5 years after you hire them. So there's some really useful insights in there as well. So if we move on. What I can say a little bit about is that as we've already been hearing, the COVID-19 situation has actually transformed our industry quite a bit. And so we've seen quite a lot of changes. And one of the main kind of focuses for ISE's activity at the moment is really trying to understand the changes that we've seen since COVID-19. We did a survey really quite near the beginning of the crisis. And what we identified was that the movement of recruitment and selection processes online, and we've heard a lot about the various different digital technologies that you can use, The cancellation and reorganization of summer internships. And so we were seeing a lot of kind of short-term hires, first in Easter and then over the summer, are being reorganized or cancelled altogether. And then we've got sort of, I think, still quite an open question on the reduction of recruitment levels for the autumn. We don't think there will be a kind of complete cessation. It is many employers are saying that they are reducing numbers, but very few are saying that they're scrapping their programs altogether, which obviously we welcome very much, and we really are encouraging employers to hold on and to continue to recruit next year, as really ultimately that entry of talent into the labour market is critical for the long-term recovery of the economy. So there's each of these reports is available on our website. You can go in, it's available to members. There's also lots of resources that are available more freely. We're very involved in kind of writing blogs and doing webinars and so on these topics. If we move on, we've also got quite a lot of other research and data that's available. So you can go to our research page, but we also have a number of interactive data tools that you can have a look at. So one here that's looking at retention, allowing you to look at it by sector and that kind of thing. So the other thing that I'd highlight is, as I said, we're really focusing at the moment on the COVID-19 situation. We're producing a regular data and policy briefing, which comes out every Thursday morning, where we're really trying to kind of draw together the key data and insights, both from the kind of wider media, from the research literature, but also importantly from employers themselves, where we're drawing in kind of key insights from them. Just move on to I think my last slide. We've currently got a new survey which is open just right at the moment, and this survey is going to be recruiting people for the next week or so. And so if you're an employer, you don't have to be an ISE member to fill it in. If you're an employer, you can just go onto our website, go to current research, and then you can fill in the survey. And what we're really trying to do is to update our previous survey, which was done very early in the crisis, to get something that's really much more of a picture of how firms are behaving and how they're changing their recruitment processes as hopefully we start to move out of lockdown. And we're going to try and sort of dig a bit deeper into how firms are handling that crisis. So what I wanted to do really was just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the research that ISE is doing. I think it's really complementary to lots of the work that Amberjack are doing, and we'd really hope that you would make use of it alongside any work that you're doing specifically with Amberjack. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much for that, Tristram, and certainly as an organisation we're keeping a very close eye on the work that you guys are doing at the ISE, particularly around these pulse surveys during COVID-19 to kind of help shape our understanding of what the wider industry is doing, and also some of the challenges that people are seeing, and how we can respond and support with that in mind. So we've got sort of a couple of questions that I'll go through. A few questions are around getting copies of the slides. So absolutely, yes, we can share the slides with you following on from today. There's a question, how do these trends reflect across Greater Europe? Do you have any insight into the trends across Europe from companies that are recruiting outside the UK? So I don't know, Tristram, if you've got any data around that?
Yeah, I mean, getting international data on recruitment questions is quite difficult. I mean, we do in ISE, we have a kind of group of similar organisations in other countries that we do talk to. I think you know that there is. I mean, everything will be very dependent on the local labour market and so on. But the response to the COVID-19 situation has been pretty similar in a lot of countries, which is this sort of mix between cancelling things, delaying things, and then moving stuff online. What we will be looking for is some of the countries that are now starting to come out of it, so particularly Australia, New Zealand, and so on, whether their kind of approach to this gives us any insights that might be useful. But yeah, so I think you can probably assume that that things are probably fairly similar at the moment in many other countries that have similar kinds of graduate labour markets.
Okay, perfect, thank you. We sadly have run out of time. We did try and cover a lot today in the session. We have one more question around kind of the blended assessment, which I'm happy to pick up afterwards, but I think it may have been asked before I went into a little bit more detail about the blended assessment. But as I mentioned, we are going to be launching that via webinar next Thursday on the 7th, so we'd love to see you guys join. Thank you very much for your attendance today. We will send out copies of the slide, and obviously we've recorded today's webinar as well, so that will be available for you guys if you're wanting to re-go sort of re-look at it. The Insights report has a lot more detail involved, and so we'd be happy to share that with you as well. But please do get in touch with us if you have any questions at all. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks very much for your time, and absolutely goes without saying, Tristram, thank you very much for your time as well. It's really, really very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.